So, thank you, Marta, for joining me in this interview. I really appreciate it. In my class, we're studying Nicaragua and the politics and ethics of development in a country like Nicaragua. So, what we talk about a lot is development projects, whether it's NGOs or big government organizations like USAID. And so we've talked a lot about like what constitutes a good development project. So you've had the success and you've had a failure, and I just want to ask you, like, what do you think? What is the groundwork? What is the basis for a good development project, especially more in the context of a rural country like Nicaragua?
Yeah, that's a beautiful, huge question.
Yeah.
And so I would say, well, first of all, the most important thing would be to understand what the baseline is, right? So starting with where are we with things, and so to me, having a sense of the data, but also looking back, how things have been changing over time. But then essentially, I think the most motivating piece of this is a vision. And oftentimes the vision piece is forgotten or postponed or left to the side. And I think what a vision does, well, not to mention, of course, a shared vision, what a vision does is it elevates the space of the discussions of what type of quality of life people want. There's no doubt they come from the assumption that this vision is brought up by the local people. I think it requires that sort of creative energy to come up with good collaborations and good networks. So really not jumping into a list of to-dos and sort of, because sometimes the problems are so acute, so difficult. Think about corruption, drug, violence, ecosystem degradation. They are so acute that the most immediate response is going to, problem solving right away. But one quality of a good systems-based sustainable developer, let's call that person that way, is that of holding that tension between the crude reality and the things to be and to emerge, with a level of presence that enables to generate creative solutions. So in a way, it's a very deep commitment to holding to a vision or creating the space and the quality of the conversation to have a discussion on a vision. So it is of course it requires skills in the process and facilitation, etc. But beyond that, I think what's being proven to be very effective is, again, a network approach in which comes also from a systems perspective, because if you want to achieve systemic change, because violence, ecosystem degradation, corruption, they are all systems problems, meaning that it's a problem that shows up in multiple places at all levels, always. So it's a pervasive problem that doesn't go away by just putting in one solution at a time. So it requires a set of solutions, but most importantly, what's been shown to have power to succeed is actually an approach called collective impact, in which you bring the whole system at the table, even if you don't think that these parts are necessarily directly related. And then you really start from the different NGOs, but also government, funders, businesses. They start doing something slightly different than they were doing in order to align around a shared agenda. And then they have reinforcing activities, meaning that they check back in, they have continuous communication, and most important of all, they have a so-called backbone organization. Like one institution serves as the connector. Important also is sharing metrics. So if we have a vision together, then that vision translates in broad goals and objectives, and how are we going to measure our success towards those goals. And some of these goals are difficult, reduce, bring poverty to zero, and you want to be ambitious because it might take a while, but you want that goal to be ambitious. And so, so what does it look like to have zero poverty in the, over the next 20 years, say? Then you start crafting your vision. From this angle of education, it would look like this. From this angle of, social justice intervention would look like this, etc. So I think this is, to me, what's been very promising.
So you would say it's more of connections, more of a collaboration, and thinking about it in terms of a system, rather than just like what a lot of the aid philosophy has been of, like, let's just dump money on a culture and just hope that the problem is solved.
Yeah, it is. It's dumping money on one piece of the system, which is considered to be the culprit, but in reality, this culprit is connected to many other, maybe smaller culprits, and so even more than collaboration is this intentional agenda. So it goes beyond to collaboration. Beyond collaboration is really having these goals that are accepted. So once you have a vision, you actually have these goals, and then you want to tackle these goals with metrics, and year by year you want to do better on those metrics, and all the activities that actually are going to enable that. So if you were to go from a project-based approach, U.S. aid philosophy, you can still work if you channel those funds to those activities that are part of the options that you have to achieve your goal. And maybe there is one organization is funded to collaborate with this other one to collectively work on this part of the system, for example. So it's not mutually exclusive. Actually, U.S. aid could be entirely a good partner in an effort like this. And in fact, most funders really like the idea of many stakeholders collaborating intentionally, with a shared agenda, because that's the best money, And maybe you have shorter term wins, that make also communities feel better, but then you also don't lose track of the longer term wins, and also having that patience, that you can only achieve certain, let's say, mindset shifts, or how the culture around women or gender evolves, let's say, over time. It takes time. It may take 2 decades, and you have to be ready for that. In the meantime, you need quick wins, and so you look at those.
So a question that has always been raised in our class is, what difference can volunteers like us, college students, make? What difference can we make in a 2-week trip, to a poor country like Nicaragua? Obviously there's these huge development goals that we have, that countries have, but what is our role in it? Like, are we actually making a difference? Are we helping? And you that have worked with in big development projects with other volunteers, do you see that they actually make a difference, or is it more benefiting those who volunteer rather than those that they are helping?
Yeah, so I think, when you say, does this make a difference, or it just helps the volunteers? Well, it shouldn't be discounted that feeling that you develop as a volunteer is actually very powerful, because then it's going to empower you as a change maker, maybe in other communities, in other environments. So in a way, you're cultivating that quality of being a change maker by doing that. So you need those practical experiences. So not to be discounted. I think it's part of your life skills that need to be sharpened and kept alive, and you need that boost. So I think that's important. That being said, I think it's very important to show up for this nonprofit there. It's important for the communities to be listened to, even if your impact might not necessarily reach everybody, or may not be life-changing in some cases. There are obstacles to any of the interventions that you mentioned. So, but leaving that to the side for a moment, I think there is value in having that constant presence and at the lowest level, just being able to listen and witness. I remember being in Mexico, and I ended up being in a very rural area where there were a lot of farmers gathering, and I had nothing to do with being there. I was not there for a project. I was just following some colleagues who had a project in this area, and just because I was coming from the more industrialized world, and definitely not a local, these farmers grouped around me in a circle and started venting out some of their frustrations around the payment scheme that they had in Mexico that was basically giving more money to richer people who had more forests for protection. I'm not going to go into details, but it was an eye opener for me. It actually changed my perception of certain compensation schemes that happen with ecosystem conservation, and it made me make different choices in my profession because of the inequality that I was witnessing. So that was important on the personal level. On the local level, these people needed to have an ambassador, someone who would speak for them. Maybe they could trust me that at some point I would raise this issue. Maybe not with the government officials, but it was important to them, to have me as a witness.
Yes.
So there is that element, and the other piece is that yes, by doing these interventions, you do help, especially if you find a way to have that continued sort of flow of services out of your initial services. So let's say that you are working on the adoption of an alternative wood stove that is safer, more effective, more efficient. So in that case, many of those projects tend to fail, meaning that either for technological design or because the adoption rate is not so high. Maybe they get used for a little while and then people go back to the norm. So the solution is not just I'm going to just build this awesome stoves and new technologies there. I'm going to do the training and they're going to be there for the longer term. So this is just an example, but how the impact would be sustained as long as there are ways for people who get disengaged with this particular technology to re-engage back, or to maintain that type of knowledge, let's say, or technical skill, whatever it is. If it's a well, the pump maintenance, and it's never ending. There's so many projects getting at the the specificity of the infrastructure. You need latrines. Are these going to be? I'm sure you'll research all the models that have been applied there, and I think the impact beyond the simple solutions or the specific solutions is how you cultivate that that interest and that receptivity over term, over the longer term.
So would you conclude that it's better to go and volunteer for 2 weeks, despite the fact that we're not making the biggest difference, rather than giving, for example, the $2,000 that the trip costs? Because that has been a discussion that has been raised in our class. Well, we're spending $2,000 on this trip, so wouldn't it help more just to give them the $2,000? Or do you believe? Well, from what you said, I think you do. But just to clarify, do you believe that going there and having that experience and witnessing, like you said, is more important than just directly giving them the $2,000 that the trip would cost?
I would say so, because then it's money goes only so far, and in reality, it's not about money. It's about the relationships that you're building in the community. I mean, you are from a Spanish-speaking country, so you have even probably more impact than maybe someone who is struggling with the language, or so I think purely monetary solutions are not really the answer, and so I think there is that element. Yes, it's true. There's carbon emissions by flying there. There's money being spent, but that's a question also for the NGO over there. I would say, from what I understand, they would probably not like to just being given money, and which raises then the whole question of who's going to get these benefits, and not to mention corruption. But let's assume that is the best intentioned place, and money goes where it needs to go. But then it's also difficult to disburse money. It's not a simple thing. So what criteria to prioritize? So it raises a range of questions that your class, your group is not going to be able to necessarily address.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So to change gears a little bit, on a more ecological standpoint, in Nicaragua, around the region we're going, there's a recognized biosphere reserve called Bosawas in Nicaragua, and it's so I looked this up. It's the second biggest tropical rainforest in the Western Hemisphere after the Amazon rainforest. So it's obviously a very big part of Nicaragua and of its environment. And we've done some research that it's being exploited. There's a lot of exploitation even by the people from that country. People from the west, they'll come to the east and they'll log in the Bosawas, or they'll just take up land for themselves because Indians, Native Americans, excuse me, they have like a reserve, like they have rights to that land. But these colonists, as they call them from the west, go to the east and take their land, and so there's a lot of exploitation in there, and obviously this is detrimental to the environment. Logging and taking land for uses other than what nature intended it to be used for. So I know this is a very difficult question, but what would you say is something that can be done to jumpstart ending logging, ending colonization, ending the taking of land of native indigenous peoples, to kickstart an environment what it was intended to be used for, just to be nature and to continue that ecological stability.
In theory, you could expose this problem. The more media, the more documentaries, the more to the point that the government cannot sort of ignore this anymore.
Okay.
So to the international community, or I can't remember what is the network of Latin American states. So there are ways, I would say, to expose this, but it needs also to be done tactfully, depending on what's at stake. If there are armed groups squatting the land, and I'm not familiar with the specific situation. But it's obviously something that would benefit from an international sort of observing body, and there are conventions. Also, I don't remember whether you could. I'm not sure whether you could use the Convention on Human Rights or the Convention on Biological Diversity, that basically secures on paper, of course, rights of the indigenous people to their resources and biodiversity in particular, and that's exactly what we're talking about. So essentially pushing these levers of international treaties also that would bring in this international interest.
Okay, so more of what you're thinking is like to kickstart this to changing the condition of what's going on in the Bosawas is like exposure, exposing the problem so that the government has to act, so that these international treaties have to be put into play, rather than just let this exploitation continue.
Well, certainly that would not be an option. You certainly don't want to get to the escalation of conflict, and that could be a serious risk, of course. But I know of cases in which now for the good and for the bad, it's a globalized world. So there is pressure that can be put at this other level. I'm not sure necessarily that fits the cultural norms over there, or that exposes other vulnerabilities. So I'm not saying that is the solution, but it's something to look into, and certainly talking to people who have done this for many years, and that's exactly their field.
Okay. One last question to end this interview. Just having to do more with the ecological system. So there's this biosphere reserve that we spoke of, the Bosawas, and what we've been discussing a lot is the economic opportunities available, and the ethics of that. There's this big biosphere that many people would love to go to see, to explore, maybe even to research, and the ecotourism opportunities available because of this. So we were talking about whether it's correct to do this. It's correct to market this biosphere where indigenous people live, and also to create the infrastructure necessary in order to be able to go to this biosphere, because it's very secluded, and not many people go there now, just because, you know, in order to get there you need to drive, you know, hours and hours on a bumpy dirt road and get local people to go take you up the mountain, which is obviously not what many people want to do. But we were just talking about whether it's ethical, and if it's a good thing to start this infrastructure, to get this underway in order for Nicaragua to benefit from this tourism.
Yeah, that's also a deep question, because, you know, some people think that ecotourism is a new form of imperialism and domination, right? Because these people have no other choices in theory. So that's a tough one, I think,
I know.
because
the bomb on you there.
because, well, my sense that you start wondering. Okay, no, go ahead.
Or maybe if you have an opinion on, like, if there's a way to do it, like, tactfully, in order to not offend the native indigenous population.
Well, it would need to be run by them, essentially.
Yeah.
I mean, they own the land.
Okay.
Or they're entitled to the use of the land. So it, you know, again, if the benefits stay local, and if you, that's the most important thing, and at the same time, you know, what other things would come along with that inflow of ecotourists? I mean, I've seen things done in a very sustainable way in terms of infrastructure, and so that's not the problem. So it's not so much the, you know, the hospitality infrastructure piece that can be done cheaply and also sustainably, also with local materials and all of that. So what would be the effect, or how would it look like if we were to have an inflow of, say, 20,000 people a year, you know, coming for the reserve, and that brings other satellite businesses, that brings other cultural norms, and what would the community think? It also, maybe it's a good way to bring in that sort of third party, you know, like more of an observation from external groups, you know, meaning that maybe it would be more difficult to squat and abuse the land from, you know, the other side of the country if there was in place this infrastructure, and the government might pay more attention and become more collaborative. There's something actually to, you know, at stake here. So there is value being generated, and that's what caused Costa Rica essentially to become Costa Rica, because the Ministry of Tourism said, well, look, we have these numbers of, you know, tourists coming for this treasure, and we need more resources allocated to protection. And so they used essentially the economic argument. So the economic argument could be used against these, you know, other infiltrations. And the government at that point, or part of it at least, could be seeing real value in that, as opposed to now it's nobody's land almost, and there's the value is only captured by the ones who have the technology or the, you know, the means to do it, like people coming from the other side of the country. So yeah, I think it's a nuanced problem. In the end, I don't think there is just one black and white answer for this. I think there are opportunities if done very consciously, both about sustainability, but mostly social justice and opportunity, how these opportunities are translating into people's lives. And because, you know, a government could go the opposite route and allow, say, drilling, or I don't think it's the case for Nicaragua, but there's been cases where much, much worse industries have been accepted in places like this just because of jobs or high-level payments or briberies or whatnot. So it seems that maybe this is even possibly a simpler place if there are no big stakes like this in the conversation.
So you do believe it is possible to have an ecotourist culture in society if it's done correctly, if it's done with cooperation?
With cooperation, I think accepting, navigating the trade-offs with intention. Okay. So knowing, okay, are probably the people who this ecotourism development would target are wealthy people. So because you need the means to actually go there, and then I would assume. So maybe there needs to be an honest discussion about that. Are we opening up, our forests for all? Are we fine with the idea that rich people from industrialized countries come here to enjoy our resources, and how are we welcoming them or not? So there's a lot of cultural discussions that need to happen, but I think with transparency and honesty, I think it can be done.
Okay. So that's all the questions that I had. I mean, we talked about a lot in this conversation. Obviously went over the 10-15 minutes I promised you, but thank you so much. You were very
Sure,
insightful.
my pleasure.
You let me know about a lot, and